Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka and I'm the director for the museum. Today we are privileged to have a man for all seasons as our special guest. Dennis Lord's decades of professional experience working with police, fire, and other emergency responders have provided him and his audiences with a wealth of interesting anecdotes and have uniquely qualified him to teach emergency preparedness in the 24 cities and communities he represents for the gas company. But his habits of leadership and community responsibility do not end with his official duties. He also serves on the LA County Aviation Commission, governing 5 county airports. And he has served as honorary mayor of San Pedro and is past president of many other civic organizations. Additionally, he was a star athlete in college and enjoyed a sparkling post-collegiate amateur athletic career. I guess you know it was basketball. But of most interest to us, he is an aviation enthusiast par excellence, and it is for that reason I ask you to welcome Dennis Lord to our museum today.
Cindy, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's my honor to be here. And I want to share this morning a very special story about a B-17 crew. But let me first share with you a little bit about myself and how I got into aviation. Early on, my dad, who was also a WW2 vet, he was a crew member on the ramp at the Bastion of Battle in Bermuda. At Kindley Airfield, he spent his war years there. It was a training base for pilots who couldn't hit a bull in the butt with a snowplow. Those pilots would be sent back for retraining, and Dad would load their fighters and send them up and they would get retrained on how to hit a target and fly an airplane at the same time, which took some skill to do. And Dad spent years telling me those stories, but as a young boy, I remember clearly on the way to Grandma's house in West LA, in the days when you could drive down Aviation Boulevard and pull off into the dirt and watch the airplanes land, before they put the fences up and TSA came and took all of that stuff away, unless you go to the Proud Bird restaurant, sit on the patio, grab your radio, you can still do that. But the reality of it is we sat there and we watched these propeller airplanes come and go, and then one day I saw one without a propeller, about 1960. And it was the era of the jet, and I finally got to see one. Dad would tell me all about his stories, his history, his love for the airplanes that he was involved with. And I love the story on how you line up the guns on a P-40 Warhawk. You take it down to the beach, you raise the tail, you put a 55-gallon drum under it, and you fire the guns into the ocean and you adjust it by the water spray. Amazing how they did things in those days. In fact, he was not supposed to leave the base, and one day he was offered a ride, and he took a ride in a TBF Avenger, 350 miles offshore. Not supposed to leave the base, Dad, but he did. But we'd come and we'd sit at the airport and we'd watch the planes come and go, and I would see that as a young boy. And I would revel in the fact that how do they do that? How do those things fly? Can I ever get involved in doing that? Well, Dad gave me that passion. And my dad had a 50-year motion picture career. Anybody recognize the photo, the lady in the photo? She's not blonde in this photo, but that is Jane Mansfield. And as you know, the movie stars flocked to the wards in World War II to honor our vets who had been injured and were in the VA system. My dad ended up with a 50-year career running motion pictures for the vets. His last 34 years at the Long Beach VA system, but starting at Sawtell in West LA. There was nobody better than my father to come in and escort those movie stars. And so we have stories of Natalie Wood and Chuck Connor and Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, and there's pictures to prove it. Dad was the real deal. But he had a passion about one airplane. He loved his P-51s. God bless him. I surprised the family at Dad's funeral in 2006 with Man of War right out of this museum, and with Cindy's help, did a flyby for Dad's service at Green Hills Memorial Park. I still honor Dad and Mom as I do my own flybys. Some of you here are familiar with that. The Three Amigos. You know, my son and I, for the last 24 years, have been affiliated with the Air Force Thunderbirds, and so he found these shirts online, and the three of us got together. And I have to tell you, Dad, in his later years, we lost Mom first in 1998. Dad flourished for 8 years, two in his own home, a year in my sister's home, the rest of his life in ours. But the Three Amigos were always on the air show circuit. It started with me being taken to the airport, and then it ended with his grandson taking him to the airport. But the story today is not about my dad, but here's a story of a young boy, me, believe it or not, I was short once, who was given a passion by my dad and a love for airplanes. And I never knew what kind of a change that would make in my life. And so the history in the harbor area is prolific. Anybody recognize this location? Fort Mac. Fort Mac in San Pedro. Just think about it. There was the lower reservation down along this point here, along the waterfront and where the marina is. This was called the middle reservation. The upper reservation is up on North Gaffey Street, which houses the gun emplacements, the gun batteries, Battery Farley, Battery Osgood, and further to the west in what is now today the nature preserve managed by the Palos Verdes Conservancy, the Nike missile launch facilities. I think there's three launch arms out there for the Nike missiles. A ton of history in this area. In Wilmington, you have Banning Park, which served as an encampment during the war. You have the Civil War barracks, the drum barracks, dating back to the 1860s. There's a tremendous amount of history. And as I grew up, I began to understand that history because I would hear the stories of the veterans. I would hear the stories of my father, and I would put it together with the things I saw in town. You can go to the drum barracks in Wilmington, and they have a fully restored Gatling gun that came out of the Wilmington Cemetery. I used to play with that corroded gun in the weeds in the Wilmington Cemetery. I should have taken it home. But my wife wouldn't let me keep it in the garage. Enough is there already. But you know, as you get a flavor for this and you start picking up on little tidbits of history, you hear a story here. I'm not telling you anything. There are thousands of stories out there. And the story I'm about to share with you was one that captured my heart. I saw a photo of a young man. Who is this? Who is this young man? These kids are fighting? They're at war for us? Who are these people? And this picture captivated me. And I found a name attached to it, and it was James C. Oakum. Who is this young man? And so I started digging. And I found a few things out. You know, today on the internet, it's amazing what you can find out. And James Oakum, there was a little bit of information about his service online. But I had no idea of what I could find, where I could find records, until one day I was punching around the internet and I come up with this blog. And the blog was signed by a gentleman by the name of Dave Oakum, talking about his cousin in World War II. And I sent an email there was an email address there, and I sent an email to this Dave Oakum. And I said a few things, but wasn't real clear, and I get a message back in a couple of hours that said, "I don't respond to solicitations on the internet." So I sent another email. And the message was, "I told you before, I know you're trying to sell me something. I don't respond to solicitations on the internet." The third email, I told him things only he would know that I had learned in my research. And the message came back, "I know you are who you say you are." Dave Oakum and I had the opportunity to meet at his home in Glendale, Arizona. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you today from Glendale, Arizona, Mr. Dave Oakum, the younger cousin for the featured person. Dave, any thoughts about your cousin?
Well, I didn't know him real well. I was about 9 years younger than he, but we both were raised on the same farm by the same grandmother. And he was a nice young boy when he went to war. And my family told me that he died in a B-17, and that's all I knew for quite a number of years, until Dennis and I made connection online.
Dave and I have been good friends because he was actually researching the story before I got engaged into this story, and then it started to blossom, and the two of us have grown this a great deal. But this young man grew into a man and had to go to war. He was born on May 31st, 1923 in Bonner Springs, Kansas. Born to the parents of James and Naomi Oakum. Later on, the 20s were the roaring 20s. A lot of things happening. Boom period. Suddenly Depression era. The 30s were a struggling time. Struggles in the Kansas area, and families are having tough times. There were divorces in this family. His parents were separated at some point in time, and he went to live with a grandmother and was raised by his grandma Alice. Looking out for his future, he's now 18 years old, and guess what? It's 1941. What do you do? There are no jobs. He joined the National Guard, thinking, okay, maybe there's something here for me. In 1941, we all know, December 7th came, National Guard gets activated, and the result is he gets placed into the 35th Infantry Division and assigned to the 137th Infantry Regiment, Company H, who was then assigned to headquarter in San Luis Obispo and do West Coast protection in 1942. What happened in 1942? Well, remember the Los Angeles air raid for some of you? February 25th, 1942? That was an episode here. Real or not, it happened. Ton of gunfire. As I grew up, they were still finding shells over on the west side whenever they do construction for new business. But there was a lot of tension in this area. We needed some leadership. We needed some guidance. We needed some protection. And the 35th Division, 137th Regiment was part of that. Oakum was assigned to guard the port. His group was assigned to guard the port of LA. They were bivouacked and they were camped out in Banning Park in Wilmington. And as a result, he would, along with his soldier buddies, would guard the port by day and patrol the streets for local talent at night. Kind of what soldiers do, isn't it? And so there was a lot of activity in the local area, making sure the West Coast was protected, making sure the girls were protected at night. And he met a young volunteer who was a volunteer gatekeeper at the Banning Mansion. Love bloomed. Things started to happen. But soon enough, Jim was spirited away and went to San Luis Obispo. So they didn't spend much time together. But one thing led to another. And in this time at San Luis Obispo, she went to visit him a couple of times, from what I learned. And he went and got transferred to Camp Rucker, Alabama, for further training. But before that occurred, he had advanced gunnery training at Yuma, Arizona, and his girlfriend followed him, and they married on one hot weekend after a whirlwind courtship, and off they went. And Jim now has got advanced gunnery training, his marksman skills, and he's looking out ahead, what's going to happen to me? And he gets assigned to Camp Rucker, which was really a transition base for infantry troops to land on the ground in Europe. And he's looking at that, and I'm sure he's wondering, is this what I want to do? Well, there were opportunities in those days in 1943. And in 1943, if you wanted to, you could fill in behind some of the air crews. They were asking for air crews left and right. He's a gunner. He could do this. By golly, I can get a promotion. I can get $90 a month. And he opted for it. He was accepted. And he was transferred to Drew Airfield in Tampa, Florida. And at Drew, he was assigned to a B-17 crew. And on he went. This crew was assembled. The crew becomes a team. The crew trains. They learn how to fly that bird. They learn how to operate that bird. They learn how to bomb, and they learn how to shoot. They do everything they have to do before being sent overseas. And they spend months doing that. Married, young man, now traveling the world, opportunity to go overseas. The world has opened up. It's no longer Kansas anymore, Dorothy. And the reality was starting to set in that he's going to war. This crew got assembled, picked up the airplane as they did, and ferried that B-17 across Nova Scotia, Greenland, had to make a pit stop in Iceland because the poor pilot had some health problems. But after 3 days in that frigid part of the world, they made it over to Prestwick, Scotland, and delivered that airplane. Their crew was Oakum and Konachek, the pilot, and the others were assigned to the 510th Bomb Squadron in the 351st Bomb Group at Polebrook, England. And they really didn't understand the history and historical aspect of this particular base, because a lot had happened there before the time that he had arrived. For one, Clark Gable was at Polebrook in 1943. And there was a propaganda tour, and Clark flew 5 missions and got a Medal of Honor for that. I mean, a medal of the Air Medal for that. And he moved on. You know, it was a film for the public because they were doing everything they possibly could to raise the morale in the United States. One of the early morale things that I failed to mention was the Doolittle raid in 1942 on April 14th, which really raised the spirits that we could bomb Tokyo. So Gable was there. Then a month and a half before the Oakum crew showed up, there was the 10 horsepower story, and it was a story about a mission to Leipzig, Germany, and one aircraft was pretty badly damaged. The co-pilot was killed. The pilot was knocked unconscious, and the crew members would not abandon him and bail out. And finally, 2 crew members, non-pilots, got that B-17 back to Polebrook. And once they got over safe land in England, all the crew members except 2 bailed out. The gunner and I believe the radio operator, Trumper and Matthews. And they made 3 attempts at landing that aircraft, and on the 3rd attempt they failed. and died. The other crew members survived because they did get out of the airplane. It was a great story, and you can look up on your website, Google 10 horsepower, spell it out. It's a wonderful story of heroism at Polbrook, and something you might be really interested in reading about. Both of those were posthumously given the Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor Award for their efforts in trying to save that pilot. But once they got there was more training. There was training in formation flying, training in weather, training in how you rendezvous, training on how you get back from Europe, and all the things relevant to flying a mission deep into Germany. The early missions that they flew were basically in support of D-Day, because what happened? This crew got there about April of 1944. By the time their training was done, their first assignment was June 6, 1944. D-Day. Probably just another day to them, but it was a big day. And this crew stood up with bombs in the bay, engines running in their B-17 ready to fly, but they were assigned to standby status. And as standby aircraft, if the other 36 got off the ground, they didn't fly. And that's what happened that day. If any one of those planes had failed to get off the ground for whatever reason, they would have filled in. So those early missions were all in support of the beachhead behind Normandy. The targets were infrastructure, bridges, highways, railways, rail yards, and those type of things. Later on, they started going deeper into Germany and taking out oil refineries, the V weapon sites, and Peenemünde, a V weapon development site. And one of the things that happened, because so many crews were being lost, I think I heard there was a gentleman sitting here this morning that used to fire the 88s at those B-17s. And I'll have to meet you again afterwards, sir, but thank God for missing some of them. And the reality of it is that it was a tough cakewalk up there when you're looking out ahead and there's nothing but AAA, anti-aircraft armament, and black smoke, and you've got to fly through that stuff, and it's a straight line, and there's no deviation from that to do your bomb run. And as a result, a lot of the soldiers had trouble with it, and Oakum's crew was not immune to that. In fact, after 3 or 4 missions, 2 of their crew members quit, just walked away. A radio operator and a waist gunner absolutely refused to fly. And as a result, they were ostracized to the ramp and probably not spoken to by anybody, and they got to do all the dirty work around the field. Didn't get to go home, but they got to do the dirty work. And then it turned out they had a bombardier and navigator, Gulnak and Steitz. Both of them were top-notch guys. What happened to the top-notch guys? They got pulled off the crew for advanced training, and they were taken out and trained to be a lead bombardier, radar bombardier. There's all kinds of new things for them to do. They wanted the top people to do that. So now they're down 4 people on this 10-man crew. So the crew starts getting fill-in folks, and there's something to say about camaraderie. How many of you think that the Lakers can win without teamwork? Not many. B-17 crew is about the same way. Got to have teamwork in order to survive up there. On June 14th, almost every day new crews came along, but on June 14th there was a special new 509th bomb squadron crew that took their first orientation mission into France. And the bombardier on that crew was Charles Norm Stevens. Charles Stevens has been a previous speaker here, and Charles Stevens has joined us today. I'd like to recognize Charles Stevens, who wrote the book An Innocent at Polbrook, from which I've gathered much information. Charles, please stand, and I just want to say thank you for joining us today. You've been a real inspiration for me, not only because tangentially you're part of this story, but the research that you did has helped me move forward with my own story. And for you to 67 years later meet a gentleman here that you were on that airfield with, I'm sure is an experience for you as well.
Yeah, I'm very touched by that. I've often wondered what it was like for the person that bailed out to look up and see us going away, and knowing that we were going to be safe, at least partly safe, and you had to bear the brunt of all that.
Any other highlights of all the missions that you have that you'd like to share?
Well, I would just like to maybe concentrate on the Augsburg mission, and you described it from my book there, but after those planes were shot down, we did go over the target at Augsburg, and the flak was intense. We were in the lead group, and so some of the others took more of a brunt of it than we did. But almost, I think there were 13 planes that were damaged in that raid from flak after we got back. The other thing was that on that same raid, when we got back over the Dutch islands, right near the English Channel, I was putting all my stuff, I took my flak jacket off and put it down, put my parachute down, and here was the English Channel right in front of us. And all of a sudden, wham, 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 anti-aircraft fire. And we had entered Germany, or we had entered Europe at this one point, and we came back through the exact same point. They didn't fire at us going in, but they knew we were coming back there somehow, and they brought in all this anti-aircraft, all these anti-aircraft guns, and they just shot the heck out of us, and it damaged our planes even more. One of the gunners was blinded by flak that day, and may have been blinded for life.
Stephen's crew was led by Lieutenant Harold Johnson and flew many of the missions that, as the family called him, Little Jim flew. And so Norm was out there with these folks. May not have known them because I'm guessing there was 4,000 or 5,000 people around that base, whole lot of people, a whole lot of airplanes, in order to do one mission of getting folks back home safely if they could. Well, I'm not going to go through all the missions that the Konachek, who was the pilot of the Oakum team, flew, but I'm going to tell you that they flew 15 missions. But the topic today that I want to share with you, or the site, was the flight to Augsburg on July 19th, 1944. Probably started like any other day. Up early in the morning, 0400, officers get to brief, enlisted personnel get to go over, grab the guns, prep the airplane, warm the engines, do what they have to do to make sure that we meet the takeoff departure time for wherever the mission was going to go. When you fly to Augsburg, it's not a short flight, folks. It's about 3 hours, a little over 3 hours to get all the way down to southern Germany out of East Anglia, England. And so they had a long ride ahead of them, a long day ahead of them. So they loaded their bombs. They were all assigned positions in the formation. They were assigned an aircraft. Interestingly enough, the aircraft that was assigned to the Konachek crew that day was aircraft 42-102949. Serial number manufactured in Seattle. Remember, the B-17s were made in 3 locations. Seattle made 50% of them, and 25% each of the 12,000 in Long Beach and in Burbank. As the crew put the plane together, they set up to run to Augsburg, and they got the new airplane. They're cruising along 26,000 feet in the air. The air is cold and the crew is in an unpressurized aircraft and they have to wear electric suits and oxygen masks. They're cruising across France. They make an easterly approach from the Strasbourg area towards Augsburg, come in from the west. And as they're coming in, suddenly, from about 30 miles out near the town of Günzburg, there's a cry. Bandits, 10 o'clock high, inbound. They hadn't been attacked much from the air because those friendly little guys and the fighters did a lot, were Herculean in helping them to stay safe. But the fighters could not go all the way down to southern Germany. Just too far, didn't have the range. Bandits came in at 10 o'clock with guns ablazing. 20-millimeter cannon is no small armament. Firing into 42 1029 49 into the nose, across the left wing. Tail gunner Heinert, nose gunner Landstrom, top turret gunner Wiles, waist gunner Philip Hersey. They're all manning their guns. They're firing away. Oakum's in the ball turret, trying to find a target to hit. 6 aircraft, FW-190s. One of them wafts around to the 7 o'clock position. It was a very vulnerable position for a B-17, and the tragedy for the Oakum, the Konicek crew, was they had been assigned the tail end Charlie position in the high box that day, the most vulnerable position in the formation. This aircraft got at the 7 o'clock position. Nobody could hit them there because the guns the guns had stops to keep from shooting your own tail off. And as a result, the Germans had figured it out that they could go there and in what is called a lazy slip maneuver, get on the rudder pedals and literally rake that aircraft with 20-millimeter cannon fire, and they lit up that left wing. It's in flames. That aircraft soon lost control, rolled over into a death spiral, and down it headed. So many times and so many aircraft over the years, but this is one that I discovered in researching this young man's life. I have 3 eyewitness accounts of the shoot down of 42-102949. We have a photo here of what it was like in the digs out there at the training base, but here is a photo of Polbrook itself from a B-17 and where they embarked from. But we're back to Augsburg. We're 30 miles out. We have 6 Focke-Wulf 190s on our tail. They're raking this aircraft with 20-millimeter cannon fire. And as a result, the aircraft goes into its death spiral. And I have 3 eyewitness accounts of the shoot down. In the missing aircrew report, 7557, a Lieutenant Lee Miller, who was in an aircraft that actually this crew usually flew, aircraft 42-31560, was in a trailing formation, and they were eyewitnesses to the rollover of 102949, which went down about 8,000 feet and exploded in midair. And as the report said by Lee Miller, no parachutes. Remember, he's flying forward and things are happening down and behind him. I have a second eyewitness account from Mr. Stevens' book. And with his permission, I want to read you what Charles Stevens had to say. Aloft for 3 hours, mostly over enemy territory. Our formation nears its objective. German gunners had taken pot shots at us in 3 different places on the way in, most of their fire inaccurate. We close in on the IP, the point at which we turn to the target for the bomb run. Our plane is in the lead box today, that's Norm's plane, and they were down, below, and forward from where the Oakum aircraft was. Each of our 12 bombers loaded with 500-pound bombs. The high box and low boxes carried 100-pound incendiary clusters to set fire to the rubble that we planned to create. It's a bright, sunny day in Augsburg with scattered cumulus clouds floating peacefully in a clear but hazy sky. Suddenly the intercom crackles. Tail gunner to crew, bandits coming in, 6 o'clock high. German fighters had never directly attacked a flight we were in since I'd begun flying missions, but now the vibrations of our machine guns from the top turret ripple through our bomber. The tail gunner and ball turret gunner blaze away. I see nothing but a superb summer day in Augsburg, all of the action happening behind me. "I got one," yells Stanowick in his high-pitched voice. And as an aside, somebody did get one. Not sure who, but somebody did get one of the 6. And so, "I got one too," claims Lucas, the engineer and top turret gunner. That's in Stevens' aircraft. "2 of our planes are going down. The intruders damaged the plane next to us, but not mortally. I feel helpless," Stevens says, "not seeing, not being able to do anything about it, just waiting and hoping that the fighters miss us with their cannon shells and machine gun fire. It's like expecting to be shot in the back, being suspended in time, anticipating the impact. The attack is over in minutes. Our crew and aircraft unharmed, but we'd lost 2 of our pull-book planes in a few lightning seconds. According to the gunners, a half-dozen Focke-Wulf 190s had flown above our group masquerading as friendly escorts. Then they'd peel off out of the sun, surprising the tail end of the high box first. Sleek silver-gray fighters with bright orange wingtips. The 2 bombers from our field flying at the rear of the formation took the brunt of the attack, both going down instantly, one exploding. The other spinning down and out of control and on fire. And indeed, that other aircraft was able to land safely. Most were captured. Actually, I believe most were interned in Switzerland. They were able to make it to Switzerland and land the aircraft. And if you got taken in Switzerland, the war was over for you. It was a neutral country, and they wouldn't return you until after the war. But Stevens' gunners said only 2 parachutes had billowed out into the freezing air. Now, there's a difference between the Miller report and the Stevens report. Where did these 2 parachutes come from? And so I asked that question, and I got deeper into my detail and discovered that 2 indeed got out of the aircraft. It was the nose gunner, Kenny Landstrom, and it was the top turret gunner / flight engineer, Charles Wiles. God bless him. Somebody got out of that airplane. So I'm wondering to myself, could I ever possibly locate these individuals? So I did a little bit of search and went on and tried to find what I could. Couldn't find a thing on Landstrom. Finally, I come up with an address for Charles Wiles, and I sent a cold letter to Orlando, Florida. I had a business trip to do, by the way, in Washington, D.C. A couple days later, I'm in D.C., my phone rings. "Hello? Is this Dennis Lord?" "Yes, it is." "Who's this?" "Understand you're looking for me." "Yes, who is this?" And he says, "Charles Wiles." I said, "God bless you." I found him. I hooked up with Charlie, and I had the opportunity to fly to Orlando, Florida, and interview him. I have 2.5 hours of definition on the Charles Wiles story, on how he got out of that aircraft. Charlie told me he practiced to be able to get into his parachute. And he'd hang it on a peg right next to his top turret. And he told me that he was best friends with Oakum. In fact, he teared up when I told him that I was researching the ball turret gunner, who had at one time passed through the LA Harbor area and was part of the local history, because they were best friends. And as a result, the parachute sitting on that peg was ready to go at a given moment. He was prepared. At that instant in time, They had already done their communications check. They've confirmed that everything was working in the aircraft, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. And everybody's shooting away. Wiles realized immediately that the aircraft was in trouble, and he stepped down, he grabbed that pack, and he put it on, and he had a method to get out of that airplane. And that method was to get down to the bomb bay, open that bomb bay door, salvo the bombs, and he's going out the bottom right now. It was his easy way out. He's a flight engineer. He knows everything about that airplane. Bomb bay door wouldn't work. Said it looked like rubble down there. And as a result, he couldn't get out. So he crawled to the nose. At the nose, he met Landstrom. Landstrom crawled back from the nose gunner position. Now, there was a report after the war that I found from Landstrom indicating that as he came back, the bombardier was already dead. He had been killed by the 20-millimeter cannon fire into the nose of the aircraft. The flight deck was being cleared. The pilot and the co-pilot were coming down from the flight deck as Wiles turned around and looked back. And Wiles is fighting with the nose hatch, trying to get out, and fighting, and he can't, and the plane is in this death spiral. Finally, it pops free, and then literally Wiles and Landstrom are sucked out of the airplane. He told me later, he says he remembered two things. One, that clanging bell, which was the bailout bell, get out of this airplane. And the other thing was momentarily flying through those flames underneath that wing, getting away from the aircraft, out into a world of silence at 20,000 feet. Well, he's free falling, and he decides, I better pop this parachute. And he starts pulling for his D-ring, and he's pulling, and he's pulling, and he's pulling. And he about wore his gloves off, pulling, because he had holes in his fingertips trying to find that D-ring. Looks down, he'd put the parachute on backwards. Okay, it's backwards. It's the wrong way. He reaches up underneath, finds the D-ring and pops it and kind of gets jerked up, but he's under canopy. Thank you, Jesus. I bet he was grateful for that. Comes down, he lands on about a 5,000-foot mountain, spraining an ankle slightly because of the way he was being carried under that canopy, but he was okay. Immediately captured by a German soldier and a farmer with a pitchfork. One of the things I learned in the presentation I listened to Norm Stevens over at Long Beach was that the briefings told you if you're captured, and there you have a choice, get captured by the soldiers. The soldiers were told to bring the prisoners in alive because they were valuable. The civilians were told, kill them. Kill them. You don't want to be around a farmer with a pitchfork. And as a result, Wiles was captured. He was marched down that mountain, and the story goes for him, the war was over. He ended up in Stalag 4 in Poland, actually went through the interrogation system at Dulag Luft in Frankfurt after spending several days to get there. And spent the rest of the war, 9 months, in Stalag 4. Then, on February 4th, 1945, Wiles was removed from that camp because of the advancing Russians and spent the next 89 days on the march of almost 600 miles in the worst German winter in decades, and survived that march and ended up being liberated on March 2nd in a temporary camp, 1944. And once he was liberated, he told me a number of other folks got together, they commandeered a German truck, and they drove like heck to France just to get out of Dodge, get back to the lines. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I was really moved by the Charlie Wiles story, and I was so moved that just for you, I want to introduce to you from Orlando, Florida, the man who survived that shoot down of 102-949, Mr. Charlie Wiles. Charlie, God bless you, and thank you for your service. Any thoughts about the shoot down on July 19th, 1944?
Well, I lost a lot of friends that day. That's about all I want to talk about. It's been an experience. I thank you for this. It's wonderful.
Charlie, you're very welcome. Charlie, actually, he left the military after the war. You'd think he'd had enough? No. Charlie re-enlisted, flew 14 more missions in A-26s out of Japan, taking on the Koreans. God bless you for your service to this country. By the way, that's Charlie Wiles from about 67 years ago. These young men, I learned more and more about them just from one that I found out, and it took me down so many different paths on what these men had done. And of course, the nurses and the other women and the WASPs and everybody else that supported behind the scenes, and the Rosie the Riveters in those days was just an amazing story. And so, what I wanted to share at the end here is that in the tragedy of war, lives are lost, family members are left behind. And Oakum not only left his family, he left his wife. And for months there was no information on what happened to him for anybody until the end of the war, when it was confirmed that he died in action. Today, Dave and I are still trying to find out details on how his remains were discovered. But emotionally, his wife moved on and later met another soldier, and love bloomed again, and she remarried. And after she remarried, 10 months later, she met another soldier and had a firstborn son. I am that son. And that's the connection to this story. And it's the link for me to kind of be self-defining, because we lost a good soldier. At the same time, I stand before you and I could either not exist or be a different person, or poor Dave would have me as a cousin. And it's been fascinating for me and riveting for me to be able to go through this, find these links and find these moments in history. This is in no disrespect to my father. It is part of our family history. A B-17 crew. Like I said, my dad was in the bastion of battle, Bermuda. But now I have this link to D-Day. And I have this link to another extended family from Norm Stevens and the 351st Alumni Group and other folks, and Ken Harbour and others that have researched this particular organization and found a ton of information. Mom was very open about her first marriage, and I vaguely remember her showing me a white box in my teen years. And following her death in 1998, a larger box was recovered that contained much memorabilia, including a full documentation of her marriage to James Oakum. But in that box was the white box that I remember as a young boy. And in this box are Oakum's air medal, oak leaf cluster, and his gunnery wings. Memory of a different time. And what Mom also received for every fallen soldier and wounded is his Purple Heart. There's much more memorabilia. I didn't bring it all today, but I brought the most important things. Oakum was buried in Germany, found by the Americans, and reinterred in France. By the time they got to processing his case, his wife had remarried, and I'm now 3 years old. And at age 3, I vaguely remember my mom going away for a trip. It's one of my earliest recollections. And she went because the family decided to bring him back to Fort Leavenworth National Cemetery, which is where he rests today in Plot I-88H. And in that box that my wife rescued from the family after my mom's death is the 48-star flag that Oakum had draping his casket when he was interred at Fort Leavenworth. Family memento. We now have 4 such flags in the family, and We are proud, we are very proud to honor the veterans that served in World War II, not only in our family, but in yours as well. So life takes a lot of twists and turns in this story. I'm going to share one piece of trivia that was really eerie for me to learn. 42-102949 was shot down on July 19, 1944. On July 11th, just 8 days before, that aircraft was flown by a pilot by the name of Lieutenant D. Lord. Go figure. How crazy is that? And so all I want to share with you is that this research is going to continue. It's a very moving story for our family. It's a very honorable story for the participants. I am so grateful that Dave Oakum and Charlie Wiles took the time to come a long ways and join us today for this. To my friend Bill Snow for bringing Dave from Phoenix, Charles Stevens for joining us today. I also want to recognize a very dear friend. Al Campbell, will you stand up? Al Campbell is a former P-38 pilot. He tells me he couldn't get it right, so he got shot down 3 times in the 15th Air Force over in Italy. Spent another 8 months in the Stalag 3 just after the Great Escape. Al, you had a very unique role in World War II. You got shot down 3 times.
That's pretty good. I was a lousy pilot.
Well, you know, lousy pilot or not, I will share with you briefly that there were only 2 episodes in World War II in which 2 pilots got into one P-38. And there is a story in Flight Journal that talks about Dave Wilsey.
Dick Wilsey.
Dick Wilsey and Dick Andrews. And Wilsey was the flight leader.
He was the flight leader.
He was the flight leader, and Andrews was the wingman. And Wilsey was shot down in southern Europe, landed in a pasture, and against orders, Andrews went down to save him. And in that article, providing cover overhead was Lieutenant Al Campbell, staving off truckloads of Romanian soldiers in a truck that were bent on taking out the 2 guys in the pasture trying to get out. They jammed themselves into one P-38, and thanks to this man, they were able to get off the ground and get back to safety.
That's right. That's right.
It's been an amazing ride for me. You meet these friends, you hear their stories, and most of them don't talk about it. But I had to talk about this one. Thank you very much. And by the way, the 351st does still have an airplane flying in this world. This is the Pink Lady, fully restored in the colors of the 351st Bomb Group, flying out of France. It got the triangle J. Notice on the tail, the first number signifies the year it was manufactured. Most of them were 1944 aircraft. So those are the ones that survived the war. The earlier ones pretty much caught those 88s. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you our son, Christopher. He is an employee at JetBlue Airways at Long Beach Airport, making sure that your flights are on time and on target. Speaking of targets, son, you know, we've both had a wonderful time on the air show circuit together.
Absolutely.
Since you were about 9 years old. Any special recollections in recent years for you?
Recent years, a lot of fun on the air show circuit. I enjoyed having the opportunity to travel across the country to see air shows, not even just experiencing them for myself by traveling all over the country to see them, but also taking my wife, my son, and of course, good old dad here, and being able to offer some different experience into the air show world and be able to see it from different perspectives and new venues. And it's really nice to be able to enjoy that and share that experience with the people around me.
In the time that we've done this, and I've worked on this story, you know, it's been revealed to you that you and I both may not have been here
Very true.
as a result of the circumstances surrounding this story and the strange twists and fates that goes on. Some call it providence, some call it fate. I prefer to call it God's plan. And in that, you had an opportunity with your grandpa, my dad, to spend his final years. Any special thoughts about that?
I think I really began to understand the scope of enjoying my grandfather's final years with him in the same home after his passing. I did reflect back and was able to see those things that I was able to accomplish with him, having that free time. This was, of course, before I was married in 2005, and being able to share those special moments with someone who had such rich history was very emotional, very respectful, and there were times we were together, just him and I at home on my days off, and we were able to put our minds together, whether it be an aircraft or movies and entertainment. And I made sure that I was trying to become a part of his final years, being able to use the talents which I had through some computer technology and through my benefits with flying, and create some lasting moments for him, some lasting moments for us now that he has passed and gone away. And it was really enjoyable to be able to share those emotional memories with him.
And you did it wonderfully.
Thank you.
I would come home. My dad would be in his easy chair late at night, and I'd say, "How was your day?" And he says, "Oh, great." And I said, "What'd you do today?" And he says, "Chris and I had buffet at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas." Meanwhile, I'm eating chicken down at the Sheraton.
That's right.
And I'd come home another time. "What'd you do today, Dad?" "Oh, Chris and I were on the Embarcadero in San Francisco." He had the flight privileges with JetBlue.
That's right.
Dad never went anywhere since World War II. And it was an amazing experience to see these two partners in crime. As I said earlier in my presentation, it started with Dad taking me to the airport. It ended with his grandson taking him to the airport.
Yes,
Son,
sir.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Dad.
All right.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight and Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.